I'd been working at the Broken Arrow Ranch for 3 years when things went wrong. And looking back now, I can tell you exactly when it started. But before that, before the wrongness crept in, I need you to understand what normal looked like, what my life was. Because that context matters when everything familiar turns strange. The Broken Arrow sat 40 miles outside Fredericksburg, spread across 1,500 acres of Texas hill country, live oak, cedar, mesquite, and limestone outcroppings that could tear up an axle if you weren't careful. Mitchell Brennan owned it, ran cattle in a small stable operation, hosted some hunting parties in season. My job was keeping their fleet running. 4 ATVs, 2 tractors, 3 pickup trucks, and an ancient Ford that Mitchell swore would outlive us all. I worked out of a metal barn converted into a proper shop, with an air compressor that wheezed like an old dog and tool benches I'd organized exactly the way I wanted them. That organization mattered to me. After Houston, after the noise and the crowding and the constant press of people, I needed things ordered and predictable. I lived in what used to be a bunkhouse, back when the ranch employed more hands. Mitchell had renovated it 15 years prior, added a bathroom, small kitchen, window AC unit that rattled but worked. It sat 200 yards from the main barn, close enough to walk for work, far enough that I had privacy. The building was limestone block with a metal roof that sang when it rained. I'd hear coyotes most nights, yipping and howling their conversations across the dark hills. That sound had bothered me the first few months. Now it was company. Better than sirens and traffic and neighbors shouting through apartment walls. My days fell into a rhythm. I'd wake at 6, make coffee in the percolator I'd bought at a garage sale, drink it on the small porch while the sky went from black to gray, to that particular blue you only get in Central Texas. Then I'd walk to the shop, unlock it, fire up the space heater if it was winter, and start on whatever Mitchell had written on the whiteboard. Oil change on the Kubota. Replace the steering linkage on ATV3. Check the brake lines on his Silverado. The work was predictable, methodical, satisfying in a way my previous jobs never had been. Mitchell would stop by mid-morning, usually carrying 2 thermoses of coffee his wife Maria had made. He was 63, weathered the way ranchers get, all sun creases and calloused hands and a back that didn't quite straighten anymore. We'd drink coffee and he'd tell me what else needed doing, or we'd just talk about nothing, weather, hunting, the Astros, local gossip I didn't really care about but listened to anyway. He trusted me. That meant something. In 3 years, he'd never checked my work, never looked over my shoulder, never questioned if I'd actually done what I said I'd done. Just trusted me and paid me fair and left me alone to work. His daughter Sarah ran the stable operation, boarding horses for the weekend riders from Austin and San Antonio. She was 26, practical and direct, with her mother's dark hair and her father's no-nonsense attitude. We talked sometimes when she needed help with something mechanical, a trailer hitch, a broken stall door, the ancient tractor she used to drag the arena. She never flirted, never gave any indication. She saw me as anything but the mechanic, which suited me fine. I wasn't looking for complications. Afternoons I'd eat lunch in the shop, usually a sandwich I'd made that morning, listening to whatever radio station would come in clear. Sometimes I'd ride one of the ATVs out to check fence lines or water tanks if Mitchell needed eyes on something. The ranch spread out in all directions from the central buildings, divided into pastures by barbed wire and cedar posts. Cattle grazed the western sections. The horses had the north pasture, 20 acres with good grass and a creek that ran year-round. The eastern property was rougher, hills and ravines and thick cedar breaks, where the deer bedded down during the day. I'd ride out there sometimes just to be alone, to sit on a limestone outcropping and watch the vultures circle and feel the silence. Real silence, the kind you can't find in a city. Just wind and birdsong and the rustle of leaves. I'd lived in Houston for 8 years before this, working in a shop that smelled like burnt oil and handled 30 cars a day. Always noise, always pressure, always someone wanting something finished yesterday. I'd saved enough to leave and driven west until I found something that felt right. The broken arrow was right. Mitchell was right. The isolation was right. Evenings I'd work on my own truck, a '89 Ford F-150 that I was rebuilding piece by piece. Nothing rushed, no deadline. Just the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole. I'd work until dark, then shower, make dinner, maybe watch something on the old TV that only got 3 channels. By 10 I'd be in bed, listening to the coyotes, sleeping hard and dreamless in a way I never had in the city. That was normal. That was my life, simple and ordered and exactly what I needed. I remember thinking, that last good week, that I'd probably stay here forever, that I'd found my place, that the running was done. The deer disappeared first. I noticed it on a Tuesday morning riding ATV2 out to check the north pasture water tank. Usually I'd see does along the fence line, bucks in the cedar breaks, their white tails flashing when they bounded away. That morning I didn't see a single one. Not unusual by itself. Deer move around, change patterns. But when I reached the water tank, I noticed something else. The ground around it was torn up, churned like something had thrashed there. But the mud was dry. Whatever happened had been at least a day ago. No tracks clear enough to identify. Just disturbed earth and a feeling that made the hair on my neck prickle. I convinced myself it was nothing. Cattle sometimes pushed around the tanks. Maybe a hog had rooted there. We got feral hogs sometimes, though they usually stayed in the creek bottoms. That evening Mitchell mentioned it to me. We were in the shop and I was rebuilding a carburetor when he leaned against the workbench and said, "You noticed the deer lately?" "Haven't seen many," I admitted, not looking up from the small parts I was arranging in order. "Haven't seen any," he corrected. "Not in 3 days. No does at the water tank. No bucks leaving rubs on the posts. Nothing." I set down my screwdriver and met his eyes. "That normal?" He shook his head slowly. 40 years I've worked this land. Never seen it this empty. Think they moved to another part of the ranch? Maybe. But he didn't sound convinced. Keep your eyes open out there. Something's got them spooked. That night the coyotes went silent. I'd gotten used to their evening concerts, the way they'd start up around dusk and continue intermittently until midnight. Their absence woke me. I sat up in bed listening to nothing, and that nothing felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Just silence, complete silence. No coyotes, no insects, even the normal night sounds. Branches creaking, wind in the eaves, seemed muted. I got up, walked to the window, looked out at the dark. The security light on the main barn cast a yellow pool that made the surrounding darkness seem deeper. I stood there for 10 minutes watching, listening, feeling foolish, but unable to shake the unease crawling up my spine. Nothing moved. Nothing called. The night was empty. I went back to bed but didn't sleep well, drifting in and out, startling awake at sounds that weren't there. The next morning, Sarah found me in the shop. I was changing the oil on one of the tractors, letting the black fluid drain into a pan when she knocked on the open door. "Hey, Lucian, you got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" She stepped inside, arms crossed, looking troubled. "The horses are acting weird." I wiped my hands on a rag. "Weird how?" "They won't go near the north fence line anymore. I tried to lead Cisco up there this morning to check a section I thought might need repair, and he just planted his feet. Wouldn't budge. Started backing up, whites showing in his eyes. I've never seen him spook like that." "Just Cisco?" "All of them. Like there's something up there they can smell or sense that we can't." She uncrossed her arms, rubbed her face. "My dogs won't leave the porch after dark anymore either. They used to roam the property all night, but now they just huddle by the door, whining if I try to push them out." I thought about the missing deer, the silent coyotes. "Mitchell mentioned the deer are gone." "I know." She looked at me and I saw real worry in her eyes. "Something's wrong, Lucian. I grew up here. I know how animals behave, and this isn't normal." "Could be a mountain lion," I offered, trying to sound reasonable. "Big predator moves in, everything else clears out." "Maybe." She didn't sound convinced either. "Just be careful out there, okay? When you're riding fence lines or checking tanks, don't go alone if you can help it." "I'm usually alone." "I know." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mitchell's got that point, 4.5, he keeps in the office. You might ask to borrow it." After she left, I stood in the shop, listening to oil drip into the pan, thinking about her suggestion. I'd grown up hunting with my father, knew my way around firearms, but I'd never felt the need to carry one on the ranch. What was I going to shoot? A cow? A rattlesnake? But now, with her words hanging in the air, the idea didn't seem paranoid. It seemed sensible. That afternoon, I went to Mitchell's office in the main house. He was at his desk, working through paperwork, and looked up when I knocked. "Sarah said you might loan me the .45, I said, "while I'm out checking the property." He studied me for a long moment, then opened his desk drawer and pulled out the pistol, a 1911, well-maintained with 2 extra magazines. "You know how to use it?" "Yeah, my dad taught me." "Seen something that's got you worried?" "No," I admitted, "just a feeling. Everything's too quiet." He nodded slowly, understanding in his weathered face. "Trust that feeling, Lucian. Animals know when something's wrong before we do. If they're all saying the same thing, maybe we should listen." He handed me the pistol and I felt its weight, solid and reassuring. "You think it's a mountain lion?" "Probably." But then he paused, choosing his words carefully. "My grandfather used to tell stories about things in these hills. Things that weren't quite natural. I always figured they were just stories, you know? But he said when the animals go quiet, when they won't go to certain places, there's usually a reason." "What kind of reason?" He shook his head. "The kind you don't talk about unless you want people thinking you're crazy." He handed me the magazines. "Just keep your eyes open. Don't go out after dark if you can help it. And if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut and get back here." I took the gun and ammunition, feeling like I'd crossed some threshold I couldn't see. Before this had just been animals being skittish. Now Mitchell was taking it seriously enough to arm me, to reference his grandfather's stories about unnatural things. The rational part of my brain still insisted there was a logical explanation. Mountain lion, big coyote, maybe even a bear, though they were rare this far south. But the part of me that had woken to that absolute silence, that had seen Sarah's worry and Mitchell's caution, knew something was wrong. That evening I loaded the .45, chambered around, and set it on my nightstand before bed. The coyotes stayed silent for the third night in a row. I lay in the dark, listening to nothing, and remembered what it felt like to sleep easy. That feeling seemed very far away now. The silence persisted. 4 nights now without coyotes, and that absence had become its own presence, something I could feel pressing against the walls of my bunkhouse. I'd wake multiple times each night, jerking upright at phantom sounds, hand reaching for the .45 before I even knew why. Each time I'd lie back down, heart hammering, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Each time sleep came harder. On the 5th morning I rode out to the north pasture, on ATV-2, the pistol heavy in a holster Mitchell had found for me. I'd told myself I was checking fence lines, looking for damage, but really I was hunting for evidence. Something concrete I could point to and say, see, this is what's wrong, this is the explanation. A mountain lion den. Bear scat. Something big enough and real enough to justify the unease that had settled over the ranch, like a cold fog. The horses had been moved to the south pasture 2 days ago, Sarah finally giving up on getting them anywhere near the north fence. I could see why when I reached it. The fence line ran along a ridge line, cedar and live oak thick on both sides, and even in daylight, the shadows felt wrong. Too deep, too still. I cut the engine and sat there, listening to nothing. No birds, no insects. Just wind moving through branches, and even that seemed muted. I dismounted and walked the fence line, looking at the ground, the posts, the wire. Nothing obvious, no claw marks on trees, no scat, no kills. Whatever was disturbing the animals wasn't leaving the normal signs. I found more of that churned earth near a game trail, the dirt torn up like something had thrashed or fought there, but again, no clear tracks. Just violence without signature. I thought about bears. We got black bears occasionally wandering up from the more wooded areas to the south. They could spook livestock, drive off deer. But bears left signs. Claw marks on trees where they rubbed. Scat full of berries or fur. And they didn't usually stick around this long. A bear would pass through, maybe linger a few days, then move on. This felt different. This felt like something had claimed territory and wasn't leaving. Maybe a pack of feral dogs, I thought, kneeling to examine a scrape in the dirt that might have been a print. Dogs gone wild could terrorize wildlife, and Texas had plenty of them. Domestic animals dumped by owners who didn't want them anymore, banding together and reverting to something primitive. That would explain the persistence, the territory behavior, but it didn't explain the silence. Dogs would be noisy. They'd bark, howl, communicate. And we would have seen them by now, or at least found more definitive tracks. I stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans, and caught myself glancing over my shoulder at the tree line. Nothing there, just shadows and cedar and that oppressive quiet. The rational explanations kept falling apart when I tested them. Mountain lion, bear, feral dogs, none of it quite fit. But the alternative was admitting I didn't know what was out here, and that admission felt dangerous somehow, like naming a fear would give it power. I climbed back on the ATV and continued along the fence line, moving slowly, eyes scanning the ground and the brush. A mile further I found something that stopped me cold. A section of fence was damaged. 3 cedar posts snapped off at the base, the barbed wire pulled down and twisted. Not cut, not rusted through, snapped, like something had hit it with tremendous force or simply pushed through without caring about the barrier. I got off the ATV and approached the brake, my hand moving unconsciously to the point 4-5 at my hip. The posts were 4 inches thick, cedar, sunk 2 feet into limestone caliche. Breaking them would take serious force. A truck could do it, but there were no tire tracks. A bull could, but the cattle were all accounted for in the west pasture. I crouched down, examining the break point on one of the posts. The wood was splintered but not weathered. Recent. Within the last few days, something big had come through here. Something that didn't care about fences. I looked at the ground on both sides of the break, searching for tracks, and found more of that disturbed earth. Scrapes that could have been anything. A partial impression that might have been a paw print, but the shape was wrong. Too elongated, too many toes. I pulled out my phone and took pictures, knowing even as I did it that the images wouldn't show what I needed them to show. Just blurry dirt and broken fence posts and shadows. The sun was past noon by the time I headed back, and I found Mitchell in the barn, working on a halter that had broken. I showed him the pictures on my phone, and he scrolled through them slowly, his face getting more grave with each image. "When that happen?" he asked, handing the phone back. "Sometime in the last few days. I was out there Monday and it was intact." "What could break posts like that?" "I don't know. Something big, something strong." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the halter in his hands, like it held answers. "You find any tracks? Any scat? Anything that tells us what we're dealing with?" "Nothing clear. Some disturbed ground, maybe a partial print, but nothing I could identify." "Show me." I pulled up the photo of the possible print and zoomed in. Mitchell studied it, his weathered face creasing further with concentration. Finally, he shook his head. "Can't tell what that is. Could be anything. Could be nothing. You ever see fence damage like this before?" "Once," he said slowly. "About 10 years ago. Had a section knocked down similar to this, out on the east property. Never figured out what did it. Everything was spooked for about 2 weeks, then it just stopped. Whatever it was moved on. He met my eyes. Or we got lucky. What do you think it was?" He didn't answer right away, and when he did, his voice was careful. "I think there's things in these hills we don't understand. Things that don't fit in the boxes we try to put them in. My grandfather, he used to say the old Comanche wouldn't camp in certain areas, said there were places that belonged to other things. I used to think that was just superstition." He hung the halter on a hook, brushed his hands on his jeans. "Now I'm not so sure." "You think this is something like that?" "I think we should be careful. I think we should fix that fence and keep an eye on things and hope it moves on like it did before." He looked at me hard. "And I think you shouldn't go out there alone after dark. Not until this settles down." I wanted to press him, to ask what specifically he thought was out there. But his body language said the conversation was over. He told me what he could or would, and pushing would just make him close up further. So I nodded and left him there, walking back to the shop with questions multiplying in my head and no good answers to satisfy them. That evening I called my brother in Houston, just to hear a normal voice talking about normal things. He told me about traffic and his kid's baseball game and a promotion he was gunning for at work. And I listened and made the right noises and felt the disconnect between his world and mine widening with each word. How could I explain what was happening here? That animals were fleeing, that fence posts were being snapped, that the nights had gone silent and wrong. He'd think I was crazy. Hell, I was starting to think I was crazy. After we hung up, I sat on my porch, the .45 on the small table beside me, and watched the sun go down. The sky went from blue to orange to purple to black, and with the darkness came that silence again. Complete. Absolute. Like every living thing for miles had fled or hidden or simply ceased to exist. I sat there until 9, then went inside, locked the door, checked that the windows were secure, and lay down in bed fully dressed with the pistol within reach. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion dragged me under around 11. When I jerked awake, my bedside clock read 2:17, and I knew immediately something had woken me, a sound, movement, something. I grabbed the .45 and moved to the window, staying back from the glass, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The security light on the barn cast its yellow pool, and beyond that was nothing but black. I stood there, barely breathing, watching and listening. That's when I saw them. Eyes. 2 points of light reflecting the security lamp, amber green and steady, watching my bunkhouse from the darkness beyond the barn. My first thought was deer, but these eyes were too high off the ground. 8 feet at least, maybe more. Too high for any deer I'd ever seen. Too high for a cow or horse. The angle was wrong, the height was wrong. Everything about them was wrong. My mouth went dry. My hand tightened on the pistol. The metal suddenly slick with sweat from my palm. The eyes didn't move, just held position, fixed on my window, on me, like they could see through the glass and the darkness and knew exactly where I was standing. I wanted to look away, to turn on lights, to do something besides stand there frozen like prey. But I couldn't move. Some ancient part of my brain had taken over, the part that knew when something bigger and more dangerous was watching, the part that said, stay still, don't provoke it, maybe it'll lose interest. The eyes held for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. Then they moved, shifted position, and I realized with a jolt of pure terror that whatever was out there had been standing on 2 legs, because the eyes had been stationary, fixed at that 8-foot height, and when they moved, they bobbed slightly, like something walking upright had turned its head. No deer walked on 2 legs, no cow or horse, no bear, not like that, not with that smooth movement. The eyes moved again, circling the bunkhouse, keeping that same wrong height, appearing at the side window for a moment before continuing around. It was testing my home, learning it, mapping it, learning. And I stood frozen in my bedroom, pistol in hand, watching those amber-green points of light pass out of view. I wanted them to be a truck's headlights, reflecting strangely. Wanted them to be flashlights from someone walking the property, though who would be out here at 2 a.m, and why would they circle my bunkhouse without announcing themselves? Wanted them to be anything except what my hindbrain was screaming they were: predator eyes, hunting eyes, eyes that saw me as something to be watched and tracked and known. The eyes appeared at the back window, visible through my open bedroom door. Pause, assessment. Then they moved on, continuing their circuit. When they reached the front again, they stopped, fixed on my bedroom window. We stared at each other across 30 yards of darkness, and I felt naked under that gaze, exposed and studied, and found wanting or interesting or I didn't know what. Then they were gone, just vanished like someone had flipped a switch, no gradual movement away. no fading into distance. Just there, and then not there. I stood at the window until my legs shook, until I had to lean against the wall to stay upright. When I finally moved, I checked every window, every lock, then dragged a chair to my bedroom door and wedged it under the handle. I sat on my bed with the .45 in my lap and the lights on, watching the window, waiting for those eyes to return. They didn't, but I didn't sleep either. I sat there until dawn bled gray light through the windows, and only when I could see the property clearly, could confirm nothing lurked in the shadows, did I finally let myself relax enough to lower the pistol. My hands were still shaking when I made coffee. I didn't tell Mitchell about the eyes. What would I say? That something 8 feet tall had circled my bunkhouse at 2 a.m? That I'd seen predator eyes watching me with intelligence and purpose? He'd already said there were things in these hills we didn't understand. But knowing something exists in the abstract is different from having it stand outside your window, studying you like you were interesting prey. I spent that day in the shop, working on routine maintenance, jumping at every sound, constantly checking the windows. Sarah stopped by around noon, noticed my state, and asked if I was okay. I told her I hadn't slept well. She accepted that, but the look in her eyes said she understood more than I was saying. That maybe she'd had her own encounters with the wrongness settling over the ranch. That evening I volunteered to fix a water pump that had died in the south pasture, grateful for a task that kept me at the ranch proper, near the buildings and lights, and the illusion of safety. I worked until after dark, stretching the job longer than necessary, and when I finally had to return to my bunkhouse, I did it at a run, pistol in hand, door locked behind me before I let myself breathe. The coyotes stayed silent. The 7th night now. I tried to remember what their howling had sounded like and couldn't quite capture it. That sound belonged to the before time, when the ranch was normal and I slept easy and whatever was out there hunting hadn't yet decided to hunt me. I kept all the lights on that night and the next. Didn't care about the electric bill. Light felt like armor, thin and probably useless, but armor nonetheless. I slept in snatches, startling awake every hour, checking windows, listening to the silence. On the 9th night, I had to ride out to the north pasture again. One of the water tanks had stopped filling, and Mitchell needed it fixed before we could move any cattle up there. I argued we should wait for daylight, but he pointed out that the cattle needed water, and the job would take maybe an hour, and I had the ATV and the pistol, and would I please just get it done? So I loaded tools into ATV2's cargo rack, checked that the .45 had a round chambered, and headed out at 6 p.m., telling myself I'd be done before full dark. The sun was low but still up, painting everything in that golden hour light that should have been beautiful but just felt ominous, shadows stretching long and strange across the ground. The ride to the north pasture took 20 minutes, following the fence-line trail, and I kept the ATV at a steady pace, eyes scanning the brush on either side. Nothing moved. No deer, no birds, nothing. Just cedar and oak and mesquite standing silent in the evening light. The water tank sat in a small clearing, fed by a well pump that drew from the aquifer below. I parked the ATV, killed the engine, and immediately missed its sound. The silence rushed in to fill the vacuum, absolute and crushing. I stood there, tools in hand, and felt exposed in a way I'd never experienced before, like stepping into a spotlight with things watching from the darkness beyond. The pump's problem was simple, a blown fuse in the control box, easily replaced. I had a spare in my tool bag, 5-minute job. But my hands shook as I opened the control box, and I kept looking over my shoulder at the tree line, certain I'd see those eyes watching me. Nothing. Just trees and shadows and the sun dropping toward the horizon. I replaced the fuse, closed the box, heard the pump kick on with a reassuring hum. Water started flowing into the tank. Job done. I gathered my tools, loaded them back into the ATV, and that's when I felt it. Watched. The sensation was physical, like a pressure against my back, and every hair on my body stood up. I turned slowly, hand dropping to the pistol, and scanned the tree line. Nothing, but the feeling persisted. Stronger now, and I knew with absolute certainty that something was out there in the shadows, tracking me, measuring me, deciding things about me I couldn't begin to guess. The sun was touching the horizon, maybe 20 minutes of good light left. I climbed onto the ATV, started it, and headed back toward the ranch at a faster pace than I'd come, trying to look casual about it, trying not to broadcast fear. But my shoulders were tight with expectation and my right hand hovered near the pistol grip. Halfway back, where the trail cut through a thick cedar brake, I glanced in the rear-view mirror mounted on the handlebars. That's when I saw them again. Eyes. 2 amber-green points reflecting my taillight, pacing me about 50 yards back, keeping the same distance, the same wrong height. 8 feet off the ground, which meant whatever carried them was running upright, running fast enough to keep pace with the ATV as I pushed it to 25 miles per hour. My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to look back directly, to confirm what I was seeing. But I couldn't tear my eyes from the mirror. The eyes held position, steady and focused, and I understood with crystalline clarity that this thing had been waiting for me, had known I'd come out here, had planned this. I goosed the throttle, pushing the ATV to 30. The trail was rough, full of ruts and stones, and at this speed every bump threatened to throw me. In the mirror, the eyes kept pace, effortless, like 30 miles per hour was nothing to whatever carried them. I should have felt relief when I burst out of the cedar brake into more open country. The ranch buildings visible a mile ahead, security lights already glowing in the dusk. But the eyes stayed with me, still pacing, still maintaining that calculated distance. They weren't chasing. They were escorting, showing me they could keep up, that the ATV gave me no advantage, that if they wanted to close the distance, they could do it whenever they chose. 3/4 of a mile from the barn, going 35 now, and praying I didn't hit something that would flip me. The eyes finally vanished. One moment they were there in the mirror, steady and unwavering. The next they were gone, melted back into the darkening landscape like they'd never existed. I didn't slow down. I pushed the ATV hard until I reached the barn, then killed the engine and sat there shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps, sweat cooling on my face despite the evening chill. My hand ached, and I realized I'd been gripping the handlebars so tight I'd left indentations in my palms. Whatever was out there was real, not imagination, not stress, not lack of sleep painting phantoms in the dark. Real, solid, fast, and it had let me see it twice now, had let me know it was tracking me, studying me, and I understood that was a choice it made. It could have stayed hidden, could have remained theoretical, just disturbed ground and broken fence posts and animal fear. Instead, it was showing itself, showing me, and I didn't know if that meant it was getting bolder or if I'd done something to attract its specific attention. The rational part of my brain, growing quieter each day, whispered about wolves or coyotes, about how eyeshine could be deceptive, about how perspective and fear could make things seem larger than they were. But 8 feet off the ground wasn't deceptive perspective. And pacing an ATV at 35 miles per hour wasn't wolf behavior. I sat there as the darkness completed its takeover of the property, as the security lights created their islands of yellow safety, and I knew I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I had to tell Mitchell everything, had to make him understand this wasn't just something spooked animals or bad dreams. This was real, and it was hunting, and sooner or later, it was going to stop playing games. I just hoped he'd believe me. I found Mitchell in his office the next morning, spreadsheets and feed receipts scattered across his desk. He looked up when I knocked, gestured me in with a coffee mug, and I could see the weariness in his eyes that came from managing 300 head of cattle and a dozen employees on land that fought you every season. "That water pump situation sorted?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I closed the door behind me, which made him straighten. "We didn't close doors here, unless something was serious. Injury, equipment failure significant enough to shut down operations, or personal problems that required privacy. Mitchell, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you decide I'm crazy." He set the mug down slowly, his weathered face going neutral. "All right." I told him everything. The cattle bunching south, the horses refusing the north pasture, the disturbed earth by the creek with the wrong kind of prints, the eyes in my rear view mirror, 8 feet off the ground, pacing me at 35 miles per hour. The shape on the ridgeline, man-shaped but wrong, too tall, with a canine profile where a face should be. Mitchell listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, the silence stretched between us like barbed wire. He picked up his coffee, took a long drink, then set it down with deliberate care. "You remember when I hired you?" he finally said. "You told me you left Houston because the city was eating you alive, that you needed something real, something you could work with your hands and see the results of. I hired you because you had that look, man who needed solid ground under his feet." "Mitchell, Aiko!" "I'm not saying you're crazy," he interrupted, holding up one hand. "I'm saying you might be working too hard, spending too much time alone out there. Mind can play tricks when you're isolated, when you're used to noise and people and suddenly there's just silence and darkness." The dismissal in his tone hit me harder than outright disbelief would have. He was being kind, trying to explain it away so I could save face, and that somehow made it worse. "I know what I saw." "I'm sure you do." He opened a drawer, pulled out a bottle of whiskey he kept for emergencies and rough days. "Take the next few days off, full pay. Get some distance from the property, see some people, remember what the world looks like when you're not staring at fence lines 14 hours a day." The thing I saw could have caught me if it wanted to. It was toying with me, Mitchell, showing me it could pace me, keep up, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Mitchell poured 2 fingers into his mug, then hesitated and pushed the bottle toward me. Mountain lions do that sometimes. They'll follow vehicles, match speed, testing if you're prey. Game wardens have documented it. Hell, I've seen it myself years back, driving the property line at night. This wasn't a mountain lion. Then what was it? The question came sharp, direct, and I heard the challenge in it. "Tell me what you think it was," his tone said. "Say it out loud and hear how it sounds." I couldn't. Because saying Dogman or werewolf or some kind of cryptid that shouldn't exist, would sound insane, would make me the crazy mechanic who saw monsters in the Texas Hill Country. So I just stood there, holding the whiskey bottle, knowing I'd lost before I'd started. "Take the time off," Mitchell said, softer now. "Clear your head. When you come back, we'll talk about maybe adjusting your schedule, getting you on day shifts only if the nights are getting to you." I left the office without the whiskey, knowing he meant well, but understanding that I was alone in this. Mitchell wasn't cruel or stupid. He was practical. And practical men didn't believe in 8-foot-tall creatures with amber eyes that could run down ATVs. Practical men found rational explanations and moved on with the work that needed doing. The day shift sounded good in theory, but it meant abandoning the north pasture repairs to someone else, and I couldn't stomach the thought of sending another person out there blind. If this thing was hunting, if it was stalking the property, then at least I knew what I was dealing with. At least I could be careful, stay armed, watch my back. At least that's what I told myself. Really, I just couldn't admit that I was scared to refuse work. Scared that if I changed my patterns too much, Mitchell would start thinking about whether he needed a mechanic who couldn't handle the job requirements. I spent that afternoon in the bunkhouse, cleaning the .45 and trying to convince myself that Mitchell was right, that my mind had just needed something to explain the wrongness I felt, that isolation and stress could paint monsters where none existed. It almost worked. Sitting there in daylight with the sun streaming through the windows and the normal sounds of ranch life drifting in, cattle lowing, someone running a chainsaw to clear deadfall, the distant rumble of the feed truck making its rounds. Then I noticed my toolbox. I keep my personal tools in a roll-away box next to my project truck, separate from the ranch equipment. Everything has its place. Years of working as a mechanic teaches you organization because 5 minutes searching for the right socket is 5 minutes wasted. I know that box like I know my own hands, know what goes where, know when something's been moved. 3 of my best wrenches were missing. The 3/4 inch, 7/8, and the 1 inch, all from the same set, expensive craftsman pieces I'd bought when I first started doing serious work. I'd used them 2 days ago, working on the feed truck. Remembered putting them back specifically because I was particular about those tools. I tore through the box, checking every drawer, every compartment. Gone. I checked the barn workshop, thinking maybe I'd left them there and forgotten. Nothing. Checked the back of my truck, the ground around the bunkhouse, everywhere I might have set them down in a moment of distraction. Nothing. Tools don't disappear. They get borrowed without asking sometimes, or they fall out of a truck bed, or they get mixed in with other equipment. But 3 specific wrenches from the same set, vanishing overnight from a locked toolbox, that didn't happen by accident. I stood there in the afternoon sun, staring at the empty foam cutouts where those wrenches should have been, and felt the first real grip of fear that had nothing to do with glimpses in mirrors or shapes on ridge lines. This was concrete. This was proof that something had been in my space, had gone through my belongings, had taken items that bore my scent and my touch. The thing I'd seen knew where I lived, had been here to the bunkhouse, close enough to access my tools, had chosen 3 wrenches of similar size, not random items, not the expensive power tools or the copper tubing I had sitting right there in the open. Specific tools deliberately selected. I walked the perimeter of the bunkhouse, looking for tracks, for any sign of forced entry. The windows were all intact. The door showed no damage to the lock. The toolbox itself, I checked it 3 times, showed no scratches, no pry marks, nothing to indicate force. But I knew I'd locked it. I always locked it. How does something open a locked toolbox without leaving a mark? How does it know what a lock is, let alone how to defeat one? The ground around back, near my bedroom window, had been disturbed. Grass pressed flat in patterns that suggested weight, something heavy moving close to the wall. I knelt down, studying the impressions, and found a partial print in the bare earth next to the concrete pad. It was 18 inches long. The impression showed 5 toes, each ending in a deep puncture where a claw had pressed into the soil. The pad was massive, wider than my outspread hand, and the depth of the print suggested weight. Serious weight, hundreds of pounds pressing down. I took photos with my phone, measuring the print with my tape measure, documenting everything because some part of me knew I'd need proof later, knew I'd have to convince myself this was real when my brain tried to rationalize it away. The print was clear, undeniable, and it was less than 6 feet from where I slept. The thing had been here, had stood outside my window, close enough to hear me breathing if it wanted to, close enough to smell me, study me, and it had taken my tools, not to use them, I didn't think, but to show me it could, to demonstrate that it had access to my space, my belongings, my life. I was being hunted, not in the immediate sense of claws and teeth and violence, not yet, but in the way apex predators hunt, with patience, with study, with a deliberate campaign to understand prey before the killing strike. It was learning my patterns, my routines, my vulnerabilities, testing my awareness, seeing what I would notice, what I would miss. The rational part of my mind, that piece that had kept me functional through 3 years of ranch work and steady employment, tried one last time to offer explanations. Raccoons could be surprisingly clever with doors. Coyotes could leave strange tracks. Maybe I'd misremembered where I'd put those wrenches. Maybe they'd been missing longer than I thought. But 18-inch prints with 5 toes aren't left by raccoons. And coyotes don't stand upright outside bedroom windows. And I knew, with the certainty that comes from pure instinct, that I hadn't misremembered anything. I called Mitchell from my cell phone, standing there in the afternoon heat with the print drying in the sun behind me. "I need you to see something," I said when he answered. "Lucian, I thought we agreed you'd take some time." "There's a print outside my bunkhouse window, 18 inches long, 5 toes. You need to see this." Silence on the line, then, "Stay there. I'm coming over." He arrived 15 minutes later in his F350, Sarah riding shotgun. She'd mentioned her dogs not leaving the porch, and I saw recognition in her face when she looked at the print. Not surprise exactly, but confirmation of something she'd been suspecting. Mitchell knelt beside the impression, pulled his reading glasses from his shirt pocket, studied it with the careful attention he gave anything that affected his property or his people. After a long moment, he pulled out his own phone and took pictures from 3 different angles. "Could be a black bear," he said, but there was no conviction in it. "Bears have 5 toes," Sarah said quietly. "But they don't stand like that. The gate's wrong. And they don't come this close to inhabited buildings unless they're after food." "My tools are missing," I added. 3 wrenches, taken from a locked toolbox. Mitchell stood, knees cracking, and looked from the print to my window to the distance back to the barn. calculating something, running numbers in his head the way he did when figuring feed costs or water usage. "I'm calling the game warden," he finally said. "Something's on the property, and whether it's a bear or a mountain lion or something else, we need documentation and we need advice from people trained for this." The game warden arrived 2 hours later, a weathered man named Tom Carruthers who'd been managing wildlife in this region for 20 years. He examined the print, took his own photos, made notes in a small field journal. His expression stayed carefully neutral, professional. But I saw him measuring the distance from the print to my window, saw him study the depth of the impression with more attention than seemed warranted for a routine call. "Any livestock missing?" he asked Mitchell. "No, just spooked. Won't go near the north sections." "Dogs acting strange? Unusual behavior from domestic animals?" Sarah spoke up. "My dogs won't leave the porch after dark. Started maybe 10 days ago, right around when the deer disappeared." Carruthers nodded, writing that down. "Anyone see anything directly? Not tracks or signs, but the animal itself?" The question hung there, and I knew this was the moment. Say yes, describe what I'd seen, and risk being labeled unreliable. Say no, and keep whatever credibility I had left. Mitchell and Sarah both looked at me, waiting. "I've seen eyes," I said carefully. "In the dark. Higher up than they should be for normal wildlife." "How high?" 8 feet, maybe more. Carruthers' pen stopped moving. He looked up, met my eyes directly, and I saw something in his expression shift. Not disbelief, but wariness, like I'd said something significant that confirmed an unpleasant suspicion. "I'm going to recommend you folks take precautions," he said, closing his notebook. "No one works alone in the remote sections. Everyone carries deterrents, bear spray minimum, firearms if you're comfortable with them. Livestock get secured at night close to the main buildings, security lights around all the inhabited structures, motion sensors if you can swing it." "What do you think it is?" Mitchell asked. "Officially? Unknown large predator, probably transient, moving through the area following prey patterns. Could be a bear, could be a big cat, could be something pushed out of its normal territory by development or drought. And unofficially?" Carruthers looked at the three of us, then back at the print. "Unofficially, I've seen prints like this twice before in my career. Once up near Llano, once down by Uvalde. Both times, we never found the animal that made them. Both times, the incident stopped after a few weeks, like whatever it was moved on, and both times the people who saw more than just tracks described something that didn't match any known species in Texas." "You're saying we're dealing with something unknown," Sarah said. "Not a question. I'm saying I've learned to be humble about what might be out there in the wild places," Carruthers replied. "Most of Texas is mapped and developed and understood, but not all of it. There are still areas where people don't go, still hollows and caves and deep woods that might harbor things we've forgotten could exist. Whether this is an animal we haven't classified or just an unusually large specimen of something known, I can't tell you. But I can tell you to be careful, be alert, and don't assume you're at the top of the food chain just because you're human." He left his card, told us to call immediately if there were any direct encounters, and drove away in his game department truck with government plates. We stood there in the late afternoon, the three of us, looking at the print slowly degrading in the dry earth. "I want you in the main house," Mitchell said to me, "at guest room upstairs. Until we know what's happening, you're not staying alone in the bunkhouse." Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain my independence and my pride. But a larger part, the part that had seen those amber eyes pacing me in the mirror, felt nothing but relief. "All right," I said, "thank you." That night I lay in the guest room with its floral wallpaper and the .45 on the nightstand, listening to the normal sounds of a household settling down. Mitchell's television playing the news downstairs, water running through pipes, the creak of old wood adjusting to the cooling temperature. Normal sounds, human sounds, safe sounds. But under them, if I listened carefully, I could hear something else. Movement outside, distant and careful, circling the property perimeter, testing, watching, waiting to see what I would do now that I'd changed my pattern, now that I'd retreated to the safety of numbers and walls and light. It knew I'd moved, knew I was afraid. And somehow lying there, in the darkness of someone else's home, I understood that my fear was exactly what it wanted. That the hunt wasn't about killing. Not yet. The hunt was about the slow dissolution of safety, the progressive stripping away of places where I felt secure, until there was nowhere left to run and nothing left to do but face it. I didn't sleep that night. Just listened to the circling sounds and wondered how long I had before it stopped playing games. The game warden's visit changed something. Maybe it gave the thing confidence. Proof that even people paid to understand wildlife couldn't identify it, couldn't contain it, couldn't stop it. Or maybe my move to the main house was the challenge it had been waiting for, the signal that I was no longer playing its game by its rules. Whatever the reason, it stopped circling and started hunting. The next evening I was helping Sarah with the evening feeding, pulling hay bales from the barn loft, while she distributed them to the paddocks below. The sun was setting early now, mid-October bringing shorter days and the first real cold snaps. Mitchell had installed motion sensor lights around all the buildings, bright LED floods that turned night into day within their radius. They made me feel safer and more exposed at the same time. Safe from what might hide in darkness, exposed like an insect pinned under a microscope slide. "You think it's still out there?" Sarah asked, hefting a bale with practiced ease. She was stronger than she looked, raised on this ranch, comfortable with labor that would exhaust most people. "Yeah," I said, because lying seemed pointless. "I think it's waiting." "For what?" "I don't know. Maybe for me to be alone again, maybe for us to relax, think it's moved on." I dropped another bale down to her. "Maybe it's just curious. Testing to see how we react." "That's what scares me most," Sarah said, looking up at me through the gap in the loft floor. "The idea that it's intelligent enough to test, to plan. Animals don't do that." "Some do. Wolves, big cats, bears, they can be smart. Not like this, not this patient." She hauled the bale toward the paddock. "My dad's not sleeping either. I hear him walking around at night checking windows." I climbed down the ladder, brushing hay chaff from my shirt. The motion lights were starting to flicker on as true darkness approached, creating overlapping pools of harsh white light around the barn, house, and stable. Between them, shadows gathered thick and impenetrable. "I'm sorry," I said. "This started with me. That first night it was following me." "You didn't bring it here, Lucian. It was already here. You're just the one who saw it first." She headed toward the paddock and I followed, both of us staying well within the light pools. The horses were already at the fence, eager for their evening hay. They seemed calmer now with the lights, though they still wouldn't look north, wouldn't acknowledge the tree line beyond the property's edge. We finished feeding and walked back to the house together, neither of us discussing it, but both of us unwilling to make the trip alone. Mitchell had dinner waiting: chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, the kind of heavy comfort food designed to distract from fear. We ate in the kitchen, the television playing in the next room, Wheel of Fortune's cheerful jingles and applause, a bizarre counterpoint to the tension we all felt. "I've been thinking about bringing in some help," Mitchell said, cutting his steak with more force than necessary. "Got a nephew up in Lampasas, does security work. He could come down with a couple of his guys, patrol the property at night for a week or two." "You think that would help?" I asked. "I think it would make me feel like I'm doing something other than hiding in my own house." He set his fork down. "This is my land. 4 generations of Broken Arrow. I'm not going to let some animal run me off it." The lights went out. All of them simultaneously: the kitchen, the living room, the exterior floods. Complete darkness, so sudden and total that for a moment I couldn't process it. Couldn't understand how every light on the property could fail at once. Mitchell stood immediately, moving to the window. "Breaker probably tripped. Happens sometimes when all the motion lights activate at once, draws too much power." But his voice held no conviction. We all knew what this was. Sarah pulled out her phone, activating its flashlight. The small beam seemed pathetic in the vast darkness, a candle against the void. "I'll get the big flashlight," she said, voice steady but too controlled. "Lucian, there's a lantern under the sink." I found it by feel, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the switch. It clicked on, battery-powered LED casting a cold, white circle on the floor. Mitchell already had a flashlight from somewhere, was heading toward the front door. "Mitchell, wait," I started. "Breaker box is on the outside wall. I'll just be a second." "Don't go alone." He looked at me, and in the flashlight's glow, his face seemed older, harder. "This is my ranch, son. I'll be damned if I'm going to be afraid to walk my own property." He went out before I could argue further, leaving Sarah and I in the kitchen with our inadequate lights. Through the window I could see his flashlight beam moving along the house's exterior, steady and determined. The breaker box was on the north wall, the side facing the tree line. "He shouldn't have gone out there," Sarah whispered. "I know." We waited, counting seconds that stretched into minutes. Mitchell's light reached the breaker box, steadied as he examined it. Then it jerked violently to the left, sweeping across the yard in a rapid arc. He was running. I had the .45 in my hand before I consciously decided to draw it. Was moving toward the door with Sarah right behind me. "Stay here," I told her. "Lock this door behind me." "Like hell." "Sarah, please. One of us needs to be somewhere safe." I didn't wait for her response. Just went out into the darkness with my gun in one hand and the lantern in the other. Mitchell's flashlight was bouncing wildly about 50 yards out, heading back toward the house. I could hear his boots pounding the hard earth, hear his labored breathing. Then I heard something else, behind him, pacing him. The heavy impact of something large moving fast on 4 legs, then the sound shifting as it rose upward, branches snapping as it stood. I raised my lantern, and in that moment, in the full and merciless light, I finally saw it completely. 9 feet tall when it drew itself to full height, taller than I'd estimated before. And I understood then that every time I'd seen it, it had been hunched, crouching, never showing its true size, standing fully upright on legs that bent backward at the knee like a dog's, but muscled like a human's, thick and powerful. Its torso was broad, covered in dark brown fur that looked coarse and thick, and its arms were too long, hanging past where its knees would be if it were built like a person. The hands were the worst, 5-fingered like a human's but elongated, each finger ending in a curved black claw that looked designed for rending meat from bone. But the head, God, the head. It was a wolf's skull stretched wrong, elongated and massive. The snout too long and filled with too many teeth that caught my lantern's light and threw it back in white gleams. The ears stood upright, swiveling independently to track sound, and the eyes, those amber-green eyes I'd seen in my mirror, they held intelligence, malice, and something worse, recognition. It knew me specifically, not as prey, but as the one it had chosen, the one it had been playing with. It looked at me across that 50 yards of darkness, and I felt the weight of its attention like a physical thing, crushing and absolute. Then Mitchell stumbled, went down hard, and the thing's head snapped toward him with predatory focus. I fired without thinking, 3 quick shots that boomed across the ranch and sent fire spitting from the point, 4.5's barrel. At least one hit, I saw the thing flinch, saw it twist, but it didn't go down. Instead, it turned back to me, and the sound it made was nothing any animal should produce. Part growl, part howl, part something that sounded horribly like laughter. Mitchell was scrambling to his feet, running again. "Get inside!" I shouted at him. "Sarah, open the door!" The thing dropped to all fours and charged. I fired again, emptying the magazine in its direction, then turned and ran. Behind me, I heard it coming. Heard the heavy percussion of its paws hitting earth in a rhythm that was gaining fast. Mitchell reached the porch, stumbled up the steps with Sarah pulling him inside. I was 10 feet away when something hit me from behind. Not the creature itself. A branch, I think, thrown or knocked loose by its passage. It caught me between the shoulder blades and sent me sprawling, the lantern flying from my hand. I hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs, tasted copper and dirt. It was on me in an instant. The weight of it pressed me into the earth, impossibly heavy, and I felt its breath on the back of my neck. Hot, fetid, smelling of rot and musk and something wild that my hindbrain recognized as death. Its claws dug into my shoulders, piercing through my shirt, pinning me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only lie there waiting for it to tear out my throat. Then Mitchell's voice, steady despite his ragged breathing. "Get clear of him." I felt the creature's weight shift, felt it turn its attention away from me, heard the distinctive sound of a shotgun's action cycling. I said, "Get clear of him." The thing made that terrible sound again, that almost laughter, but its weight lifted. I gasped air into my lungs, rolled onto my side in time to see it backing away, eyes fixed on Mitchell standing on the porch, with a 12-gauge leveled at its chest. The shotgun's bore looked like a tunnel to hell in the darkness, and Mitchell held it steady, unafraid, meeting the creature's gaze without flinching. Sarah was behind him, her phone out, casting just enough light to make the thing visible in pieces, fur and muscle and those terrible eyes. "That's right," Mitchell said. "I don't know what you are, but I know what buckshot does to flesh at this range. Now get off my property." My pistol rounds had hurt it, I'd seen that much. But Mitchell wasn't offering pain. He was offering a faceful of lead pellets at point-blank range. And more importantly, he was offering certainty. The creature was intelligent enough to recognize the difference between a panicked man firing blindly in the dark and a rancher defending his territory, with 60 years of determination behind him. The creature stood slowly, rising to its full height. In the overlapping lights from Sarah's phone and the lantern lying on its side in the yard, it looked even larger, even more impossible. It stared at Mitchell for a long moment, and I saw something pass between them. An acknowledgement, predator to alpha, a recognition of legitimate threat. Then it looked at me, down at me, lying in the dirt with its claw marks burning in my shoulders, and I swear to God it smiled. Not with its mouth, but with those eyes with the intelligence behind them. The smile of something that was letting me live by choice, not necessity. It turned and loped toward the tree line, moving from 4 legs to 2 and back again with fluid ease. In seconds it had vanished into the darkness beyond our property, leaving only the sound of branches breaking as it moved deeper into the woods. I lay there for another moment, waiting for my body to remember how to function. Then Mitchell was helping me up. Sarah was pressing something against my shoulders where blood was soaking through my shirt. And we were moving inside, barricading the door, checking every window. Maria met us in the hallway, her face pale, but her hands steady as she took over, pressing the cloth to my wounds. She'd been upstairs when it started, had wanted to come down, but Mitchell had ordered her to stay put, to lock herself in the bedroom with the phone in case she needed to call for help. Mitchell reset the breaker. Something had physically torn the box open and yanked the main line loose, and the lights came back on in a flood of normalcy that felt obscene after what we just experienced. Sarah cleaned my wounds while Mitchell stood watch, the shotgun never leaving his hands. The claws had gone deep, but not through the muscle. 4 parallel gouges on each shoulder. They would scar. "We need to call someone," Sarah said, her hands shaking as she applied antiseptic that burned like liquid fire. "The sheriff, the game warden, someone." "And tell them what?" Mitchell asked quietly. "That we were attacked by something that can tear apart a breaker box and throw a man around like a doll? Something that stood down when threatened but could have killed all of us if it wanted?" "We have proof," I said through gritted teeth. "Claw marks, prints, 3 witnesses. We have injuries from an unknown predator and stories that will make us sound insane," Mitchell interrupted. Carruthers was sympathetic, but even he wouldn't commit to what this thing is. Local sheriff will think we're drunk or trying to cover up something. And if by some miracle they believe us and send a hunting party out here, what happens when they don't find anything? When it vanishes like Carruthers said they always do? So we just... What? Pretend it didn't happen? We acknowledge it happened, we take precautions, and we hope it moves on like Carruthers said they do. Mitchell set the shotgun against the wall, finally, and rubbed his face with both hands. "I saw it, Lucian. I looked that thing in its eyes, and I understood something. It wasn't hunting for food, it was playing, testing us, seeing how we'd react. And when I stood up to it, when I showed I wouldn't back down, it chose to leave." "This time," Sarah said. "Yes, this time." Mitchell looked at me. "I won't blame you if you want to leave. Pack up tonight, I'll pay you through the end of the month. No questions asked." I wanted to. God, I wanted to run so badly I could taste it. Get in my truck, go and drive to Austin or Houston or anywhere with crowds and lights and civilization. Never look back at this ranch or these woods or those amber eyes. But something in me rebelled against that too. The same part that had made me fire those shots. The part that had stood between that thing and the house even when every instinct screamed to run. "I'll stay," I heard myself say, "until we know it's moved on." Sarah finished bandaging my shoulders. Mitchell poured 3 glasses of whiskey. We sat at the kitchen table and didn't talk about what we'd seen. Couldn't find words adequate to the reality of it. Outside, the motion lights activated periodically, tracking the movement of nothing we could see. I slept on the couch that night with the .45 reloaded and within reach. Mitchell dozed in his recliner with the shotgun across his lap. Sarah stayed upstairs, but I heard her walking around until past midnight, checking windows, turning on every light. The next 3 days passed in a kind of fevered caution. We moved in groups, armed constantly, finished all the ranch work before dark. The motion lights activated regularly, but we never saw what triggered them. The prints around the breaker box were photographed, but remained a mystery. 5 toes, wrong size, wrong shape, impossible to identify. On the second day, Sarah found my missing wrenches. They were arranged in a line on the north fence, the one nearest the tree line, the 3/4 inch, 7/8, and 1 inch, laid out in order of size on top of a cedar post, perfectly aligned, like they'd been placed there deliberately with care, like a message I couldn't read, but understood instinctively. I was here. I took these from your space. I could take anything I wanted. On the 4th night, the circling stopped. The motion light stayed dark. The horses returned to normal patterns, spreading out across their paddock. The cattle migrated north again, returning to their usual grazing areas. It was gone. Carruthers came back out, examined the breaker box damage, took photos of my healing wounds. "Same pattern," he said. "It stayed about 3 weeks, escalated to a confrontation, then moved on. Whatever it is, whatever drives it, you're out of the danger period." "Where did it go?" I asked. "No way to know. Could be 50 miles from here by now. Could be watching us from the tree line." He looked north toward the woods. "I've stopped trying to understand it. I just document what I can and warn people to be careful." Mitchell relaxed somewhat after Carruthers' visit, started sleeping in his own bed again. Sarah's dogs returned to their normal routine, ranging across the property without fear. Life tried to return to normal, but I couldn't do it. Couldn't settle back into the routine of ranch work and evening tinkering and pretending the world was safe. Every shadow held potential threat. Every nightfall brought the memory of those eyes, that weight, those claws piercing my flesh. I started sleeping less, eating less, jumping at sounds that Mitchell and Sarah ignored. "You need time," Mitchell told me. "What you went through, what we all went through, that takes time to process." He was right, but time wasn't the issue. The issue was that I now knew something I could never unknow, that the world held things we'd forgotten could exist, things that hunted with intelligence and malice, things that could choose to kill you or let you live based on calculations we'd never understand. I lasted 2 more weeks before I told Mitchell I was leaving. He didn't try to talk me out of it, just paid me what I was owed, plus a generous severance, shook my hand on the porch where he'd faced down that thing with nothing but a shotgun and determination. "You're always welcome back," he said, "when you're ready, if you're ever ready. Thank you for everything." I wanted to say more, wanted to acknowledge what he'd done that night, standing between me and that creature, risking his life for his employee. But the words wouldn't come. Sarah gave me a hug that pressed against my still healing shoulders, making me flinch. "Stay in touch," she said. "Let us know you're okay." I promised I would, knowing I probably wouldn't. Driving away from Broken Arrow Ranch felt like escape and surrender at the same time. Escape from the immediate danger. Surrender to the fear that thing had instilled in me. I didn't go back to Houston. Too many family there. Too many questions I couldn't answer honestly. Instead, I headed to Austin. Found work at a diesel fleet maintenance company. The kind of job that kept me around people and machines and fluorescent lights from dawn to dusk. I rented a third-floor apartment in a complex near downtown, as far from woods and darkness as I could get. The first time I tried to take a job that would require me to work alone on a broken-down rig out on Highway 290, I had a panic attack so severe my supervisor thought I was having a heart attack. After that, I made it clear. Day shift only, facility work only, no remote service calls. They accommodated me, probably thought I had anxiety issues or PTSD from something I wouldn't discuss. They were half right. I sold my project truck because driving it meant taking back roads alone, meant being isolated in darkness with only my headlights between me and whatever might be watching. Bought a used Honda instead, something anonymous and city-friendly that never left the interstate. Sarah called me once, about 3 months after I'd left. "Just wanted you to know everything's been quiet here," she said. "No signs of it coming back. Life's back to normal." "That's good," I said, and meant it. "Tell your dad I said hello. He misses you, says you were the best mechanic we ever had." A pause. "Are you okay, Lucian?" "I'm fine, just needed the change, you know?" She didn't push it, and I was grateful. After that call, I changed my number, told myself it was just practical, fresh start. But really, I couldn't handle even the slightest connection to what had happened, to what I'd seen. My family back in Houston thinks I got restless with ranch life, wanted city amenities and dating opportunities and all the things young men supposedly want. I let them think that. It's easier than the truth. My brother keeps inviting me to his kids' baseball games. The same nephew whose scores he told me about that night when I called just to hear something normal. I always find excuses. Open fields feel wrong now. Too much space, too many shadows at the edges where the lights don't reach. I can't explain that to him, so I just don't go. Dating is complicated now. Women ask why I keep all the lights on, why I won't go camping or hiking, why I have a second-floor bedroom despite claiming to love ground-floor convenience. I make jokes about being afraid of the dark, about childhood fears I never outgrew. Most of them think it's quirky or charming at first, annoying later. Relationships tend not to last. Mitchell does send Christmas cards like I predicted. Brief notes about the ranch, the livestock, Sarah's life. He never mentions that night or what we saw or the creature that had us all barricaded inside. The subtext is clear. We all agreed to move on, to leave it in the past where it belongs. I should be able to do that. It's been 5 years now. The scars on my shoulders have faded to thin white lines that most people never notice. My job is stable, my apartment comfortable, my life safe and predictable, and everything I thought I wanted. But I still sleep with the lights on. Still check my rearview mirror compulsively when driving at night, expecting to see amber-green eyes reflecting my taillights. Still refuse jobs that would put me alone in dark places. My coworkers think I'm eccentric. My few friends think I'm neurotic. None of them understand that it's not paranoia when you know, when you've seen with your own eyes, what's actually out there. Sometimes I dream about that night, about the weight of it pressing me into the earth, the heat of its breath on my neck, the intelligence in its eyes as it looked at me one last time before disappearing into the trees. In the dreams, Mitchell doesn't have the shotgun. Sarah doesn't open the door. It's just me and that thing, and the choice it makes is different. I wake from those dreams, gasping, reaching for the .45 I no longer keep on my nightstand because having a loaded gun in my apartment seemed like asking for trouble. Instead, I get up, check all the locks, turn on every light, and wait for dawn. The rational part of my mind knows I'm safe here. Third floor, urban environment, hundreds of people within shouting distance. Whatever that thing was, it lived in wild places, in the deep woods and hill country where humans had forgotten to be afraid. It had no reason to come to Austin, no reason to follow me specifically. But the part that felt its claws in my flesh, that looked into those amber eyes and saw recognition, that part knows different. It chose me that first night for reasons I'll never understand. Chose to follow me, to test me, to play with me. And when I finally escaped, when I ran to the safety of civilization and walls and light, it chose to let me go. The question that keeps me awake isn't whether it's still out there. I know it is. Things like that don't die conveniently, don't vanish just because we stop seeing them. The question is whether it's done with me, whether I survived because I got lucky or because I passed some test I didn't know I was taking, whether the game is over or just paused, waiting for the right moment to resume. I tell myself I survived, that I made the right choice leaving the ranch, that my life now is proof that you can escape your nightmares if you run far enough and fast enough. But deep down, in the parts of myself I only acknowledge at 3 a.m. when the lights are all burning and sleep won't come, I know the truth. I didn't escape. It let me go. There's a difference, and that difference is the weight I carry every day. The knowledge that I survived not through strength or courage or luck, but through the arbitrary mercy of something that could have killed me as easily as breathing. I'm alive because it chose to let me live. And every night when I lie in my too bright apartment, listening to city sounds and trying not to think about amber eyes and darkness, I wonder if that choice was permanent or just temporary. If it's out there in the hill country still playing its games with new victims, or if it remembers me, the one that got away, and is patient enough to wait for the day when I let my guard down. When I finally believe I'm safe, that day will never come. I've accepted that much at least. I'm not the person I was before that October night at Broken Arrow Ranch. That version of me died when those claws pierced my shoulders, when I looked into those eyes and saw something that shouldn't exist. What survived is something harder, more cautious, forever marked by the knowledge that we live in a world with shadows deeper than we imagined, with creatures that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. I survived my encounter with one of those creatures, but survival isn't the same as winning. And sometimes lying awake in the artificial safety of my lit apartment, I can still feel the weight of its attention on me, patient and intelligent and utterly inhuman, waiting somewhere in the darkness beyond my walls to see what I'll do next, waiting to see if I'll ever give it another chance to finish what it started. I never will. That much I can control, but knowing I have to maintain that vigilance forever, that I can never relax or forget or fully believe I'm safe, that's its own kind of prison, its own kind of death. I'm alive, yes, but I'm not free, and I never will be again.